And I'm Scotty. 7 months ago, I made a video called Why I Ditched My Smartphone. And in that video, I talked about the dumb phone that I got, which was the Caterpillar B30. Several people wrote and they asked about, can I use this phone on my network in Australia, in the US, so on and so forth. And that, my exchanges with them, as well as some questions from other people in the YouTube comments and from the contact form on my website, comments on the article on my website, all that kind of stuff, it made me realize that I need to actually talk about how to pick a dumb phone, because there are a lot of details you need to consider, and it's not so easy. With smartphones, you basically just usually you go to your provider, you grab one, and you're done. With dumb phones, many times, like say you say like, hey, I want to get this Cat B30, you live in Australia, you have a certain provider, and they say, oh no, sorry, that's not going to work with our network. So then you go, well, what does work with your network? And they usually point you to their online store, where you have basically one dumb phone option, and it's kind of a piece of crap, and you read reviews and it has poor battery life, and so like, okay, what do you do? Well, alrighty. So first of all, you have to understand that when we talk about 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, there are many different flavors of 2G and 3G, all these different Gs. There's many different flavors of that. For example, with 2G, there's kind of the old 2G, then there's 2.5G, then there's 2.75G, and then within these sort of sub-Gs, there are also different providers in different countries actually do things differently. Like the protocols can actually be slightly different or completely different. The frequency bands that they use are completely different. So like a dumb phone that I buy here in Europe is 3G for GSM networks. That phone is not actually going to work. Like if you live in the US, it will work on certain networks but not others. Maybe, but not always. If you live in Australia, it's the same thing. If you live in Japan, they have like their own crazy systems. China has their own schemes that are sort of like Europe, but sometimes not always, and like it gets really complicated. So the first thing to understand is that you can't just go and say, ooh, dumb phone, 3G, boom, it works. Another question people asked me quite a few times actually was, well, what about my old cell phone? Like I have an old Motorola Battle phone, and yeah, it's from like the early 90s. Can I just use that? And generally the answer to that is no, because back in the early 90s they used, at least in the US, the systems they were using were like amps, deamps. They used like TDMA, some providers used CDMA. There were all these different protocols, and many of those like just won't work anymore. So then you might ask, well, hey, but I've got a cell phone from like, say, late 90s, early 2000s. Will that work? And again, most likely the answer is no. As technology has progressed, all the wireless providers, they added 3G, they added 4G, now they're adding 5G. And as they add more and more Gs, what that means is often they have to actually add more antennas and more boxes connected to the antennas. They have more equipment to maintain, so they're constantly upgrading, but they're also constantly trying to push the old technologies out the door. So using an old phone, it's possible. Like if you live in Europe, maybe, and it's GSM, and it's maybe you'd have to check it out. But as I say, that's not really easy to do unless you understand all the different ins and outs and all the protocols of 3G edge versus sometimes they call it like HD. Oh Jesus, it gets really complicated. So that's the first thing. So you might go, well, okay, well, what about like Nokia phones? Because one of the reasons Nokia sort of came back to life was because they were going to offer a bunch of dumb phones, especially the Nokia 3310, which I have in a lovely, bright, screaming, fluorescent yellow. So Nokia came out with a bunch of dumb phones, and if you go on their website and you look, you can see that they offer a whole slew of them. Okay, so there are several problems with this, and the first problem is that the cheapest phones, which are like 20 or 30 bucks, they're very basic. They do basic calls, basic texting, and you'd think like, well, hey, that's great. I'll get one of those. I'm done, right? No, not so fast. because most of the cheaper models don't support 3G, they're only 2G. Now, in addition to the complexity that I've already mentioned, which is that there's different flavors of 2G even, and it may not work in your country with your wireless provider and all that kind of stuff, 2G networks are actually on their way out the door. In fact, in many places, there is no more 2G network. In certain countries, you can have, some providers will still be offering 2G, other providers, they've already canceled it. I think it was Verizon in the US, for example, they announced that the 2G support is gone in 2019. Well, at the time of recording, that's just a few short months away. So there's no point in getting a dumb phone that's only 2G, because depending on where you live, that technology is going out the door. Especially as 5G comes online, they're really going to want to push the 2G out the door, because they don't want to be supporting 2, 3, 4, and 5, 4 different kind of independent systems. Like that's too much. So don't get a dumb phone that's 2G only, because most likely, if it's not already dead on your provider, it will be in the very, very near future. So then you might go, well, okay, I'll get a 3G phone, because, for example, with the Nokia 3110, if I remember correctly, this came out first, it was 2G only. Then this is the 3G dual SIM model. It's about like $70 or something. It's quite a good little phone, actually. Much, much better battery life than the Cat B30. So you might say, well, I'll just get a 3G phone, right? Well, at the moment, that's your best bet. But as I said, again, 3G in Europe is not necessarily the same as 3G in the US, which is not necessarily the same as 3G in Australia, so on and so forth. So you're going to have to check. Most likely, you're going to have to call your wireless provider and say, hey, I'd like to get this phone. Is this compatible? Is it going to work? And sometimes they may not even tell you, so you may have to kind of do some homework. The easiest thing to do is like you hop on Amazon and you search for a specific model number, like the Nokia 3310, and you find the one on your Amazon. Like if you're in the US, go to Amazon.com, and usually in the title of the item, it'll tell you this is for like Sprint or blah blah blah. Then you know you're relatively safe. But the other problem with 3G is that many providers, for example, Telstra in Australia, has already announced that their 3G networks are going the way of the dinosaur. Telstra said in 2020, which of course we're nearing the end of 2018, so that's less than 2 years away. Verizon also announced in the US that they were going to be canceling their 3G service by 2021, which is less than 3 years from now. Now, as I said earlier, that's if you want to get a dumb phone, 3G is kind of your best bet at this point, because it's most likely that it's going to work. You'll be able to find one that does work on your network, and probably at least for the next year or two, maybe 3 years, you're going to be okay. And by then, you're probably going to want to get a new phone anyway, if you're like most people. The other thing is, regarding 3G disappearing, if you live in an area where 5G is already being rolled out, 5G is actually being rolled out in many cities across the world. If you live in one of those areas where they're kind of an early adopter of 5G, then you may see 3G disappear more quickly. But that depends, like, does everyone adopt 5G? Is everyone who has a 3G phone, maybe they don't get a new 5G smartphone, because you'll need a totally new phone to support 5G, but maybe a bunch of people will be upgrading and they'll have 4G, and then the providers will say, well, we've got hardly anybody left using 3G. Now we've got all these 5G users, so let's just get rid of 3G earlier than we planned. That's always a possibility. Right, so you may just say at that point, well, 4G is going to be around for a while, right? So why don't I just get a 4G dumb phone? Well, okay, this gets complicated, because there is two phones in particular that I know about. I searched far and wide to try and find a 4G dumb phone, because of course, instead of getting the 3G Nokia, I thought, well, let me just get a 4G one, it'll last forever, and I won't have to get another new phone in like 2 years or something. So I searched far and wide, and there were only two phones I could find. And the first one is the Nokia 8110. And as you can see, it's a pretty cool looking phone. You can get it in this similar bright fluorescent yellow. which I like. It's a slider phone, which is cool, shades of the Matrix, right? And it's 4G. Has good battery life. You read the reviews, like what's not to love, right? And I think it's about like 80 bucks or something, so it's like $10 or $15 more than the 3310, and it's got 4G, so why not? Well, you read the fine print, and it turns out that these phones, all of Nokia's other dumb phones, they use Nokia's proprietary, I believe it's a Java-based operating system. So no Android, no Google, it's a Nokia proprietary OS that runs on the phone. Starting with the 8110, this 4G dumb phone, we have a problem because it actually uses something called KaiOS, K-A-I-O-S, which is actually a Linux-based mobile operating system specifically designed to support so-called 4G feature phones, what I call a dumb phone. And that seems like it would be okay because this KaiOS was actually based on Mozilla, the company that makes the Firefox web browser and the Thunderbird email client, among other things. Mozilla was making something called Firefox OS, which was supposed to be their own Firefox mobile operating system. That fell by the wayside, so KaiOS picked up the open source, the open source version of this, and they took it and they turned it into their own mobile operating system for 4G dumb phones especially. Uses very little memory, it's very efficient, so you don't need a super powerful smartphone. You can run it, you can have 4G, and it'll work on a winkier phone like a dumb phone. That sounds pretty good, except if you read the even finer print, what you discover is that in June of 2018, Google decided to invest $22 million in KaiOS. Well, why would they do that? Well, it turns out that there's another 4G dumb phone that's available called the Geophone, that's with a J, and this phone is extremely popular in India. Now, Geo is a mobile provider in India that has over 200 million customers, and apparently this Geophone, it's basically just a 4G dumb phone. It runs KaiOS, and there are at least 25 million or more people who bought this Geophone, so obviously they have these dumb phones that use the 4G network. They're very popular in India, and of course India being a very populous country, Google saw an opportunity here. There are going to be obviously tens if not hundreds of millions of people that are using KaiOS, which is not Google's Android operating system. So Google invested $22 million in KaiOS. And in exchange, KaiOS now includes Google services, including Google Search and Google Maps and basically probably all the stuff that Google uses to spy on you. So if you want to get rid of your smartphone and you go, hey, I want to get a 4G dumb phone, don't get one with KaiOS on it because it actually still has Google services on it, even though it's not Google's operating system. So the Geophone and the Nokia 8110, these are the only two phones that I could find. The Geophone is actually not available. It's available in India. I think they're going to make it available in Europe and Latin America shortly. There was an article I read back in like June or July, I think it was in July of this year, just a couple months ago, where they said, yes, we're going to be offering this phone, but not all over the world. And so, yeah, the Nokia 8110 and the Geophone, they're the only 4G dumb phones available at the moment. I have searched far and wide. I cannot find anything else. But that reminds me. Another viewer said, hey, what about the Lite phone? Well, the original Lite phone looks something like this, and it's this white, tiny little, almost credit card size, super flat thing, and it allows you to do basic calling, and it seems great, right? Well, there are a couple problems, and the first problem with the original Lite phone is that it was 2G only, and as we've already established, 2G is going the way of the dinosaur, so that's a bad idea. The second problem is that the original Lite phone is no longer available for sale. The Lite phones were made by a company called Lite, I believe, and based in Brooklyn, and they kind of did the crowdfunding thing, and so it's not something you can just like hop on Amazon or go to your local store and buy. It's kind of a specialty item. So then you might say, well, yeah, but they're coming out with the Lite Phone 2. It has an e-ink screen, and most importantly, it supports 4G. So you might think, oh, we're saved. But again, the Lite Phone 2 is actually being funded by an Indiegogo campaign, which so far has raised $1.9 million. And if you go to their website and you want to pre-order a Light Phone 2, because they will be available apparently in April 2019, if you want to pre-order one, you have to fork over $300. However, they do have a love package where for only $500 you get 2 phones, but still that's $250. Now I don't know about you, but I would much rather spend like 60 or 70 bucks on one of these. It's going to last me several years and I'm happy. I would be far happier with maybe $40, $50 for a 4G dumb phone, but I'm certainly not going to spend $300 on one, no matter how cool it looks. So that's where we are today. It's not easy to find a good dumb phone. There are many other models out there made by kind of smaller companies. Most of them get really bad reviews. If you want something made by a good quality dumb phone that's made by a major manufacturer, Nokia is pretty much your best bet at the moment. The only 4G phone they have is the 8110. I'm hoping, this phone originally, as I said, was 2G, then they came out with a 3G version. I'm hoping that they actually come out with a 4G version with their Nokia operating system on it, but I'm afraid that it's going to be KaiOS going forward on all 4G dumb phones. So yeah, I unfortunately don't have an actual answer that will solve if you want 4G. At the moment, there's really nothing out there. If you want a 4G dumb phone and you want to avoid the Google ecosystem, you're kind of screwed. So if anyone out there does know of any 4G non-Google dumb phone that's available, please let us all know in the YouTube comments below. You can go to ScottiesTech.Info on my website, use the contact form, shoot me an email, whatever, because I'm all ears, because I'm looking for one. So yeah, that's the story. That's the state of trying to purchase a dumb phone these days in the era of smartphones. It's not easy. But, well, hopefully that will help you in your search if you happen to be hunting for one. Nonetheless. So, for more techie tips, see ScottiesTech.Info. Thanks for watching. See you next time.